Unit 2 Economics, Day 6. The Fed's origin story. At the end, you should be able to defend the creation of the Fed, or maybe you can criticize the creation. The Fed's origin goes back to panics. These have occurred all throughout time and many times through America's history. They are big ups and downs in the economy. It's very natural to go through boom bust cycles. They're business cycles. But when they are exaggerated, the boom's great, but the crash is very painful and hurts households and firms severely. So ups and downs, pretty natural. It's a business cycle. You just don't want it to be so extreme. And the panics, depressions are an extreme example. So we'll pick one. Panic of 1873 has to do with the railroad industry. It takes a normal boom or bust cycle and exaggerates it and causes pain throughout this great nation. So if we rewind the clock to the middle part of the 1800s, America's expanding from sea to shining sea. There's just no way to get from sea to shining sea. So investors realize transportation is the wave of the future. It's the next hot technology, similar to the way computers and AI chips are today. Then it's the railroad. That is the future. That's where you need to invest because people need to get from sea to shining sea. We need to build railroads. We need to build trains. There is a demand to move. There is money to be made. So investors borrow money and they start building railroads because that is the technology of the day. And then more people see what's going on and more investors jump in and borrow money. And there's a proliferation of railroads out west. They start building because they believe the demand is there to travel west. And so the West then is spread with railroads everywhere. Problem. We've now increased the railroad supply. And when the supply goes up, price goes down. The railroad companies are all competing for the same customers, and there's not enough customers moving west. And as a customer, you can pick and choose. And so prices fall. And when the prices fall to use the railroad, the guy that borrowed the money, the investor, no longer can pay back the bank. And when it's time to pay back the bank, he can't. So he has to forfeit his collateral, which is his ownership of a railroad. So what does the bank do? Banks give out loans. They don't sell railroads. Well, in this case, they have to try to sell a railroad. But guess what? That railroad's not worth anything because the high supply of railroads has destroyed their value. And so now they can't sell it. They're left holding not money, but a worthless railroad. And so the banks go under. First problem is now if the banks go under, no more loans are flowing into the economy. The money that's out there is out there, but no more money is coming. No more money causing a spike or an increase or a boom. Well, where do they get their loans? Where do they borrow money if they want to start new businesses or borrow to buy a house? They can't. And so spending goes down for households, spending goes down for firms, less loans, less spending, the economy shrinks. That is the Panic of 1873 bust. Boom goes the dynamite. Now let's rewind a little bit, step aside from the railroads, and just talk about a normal business cycle versus an exaggerated crash. So let's just look at a normal scenario here where bank loans to an investor. The investor decides to open a business. He has to hire workers, pays his workers. Let's say this guy's making Takis. And then in turn, customers or even the households he's paying buy the Takis from him. And as he sells more Takis, he hires more workers. So he's generating sales from initial households, new households, and the firm grows, all starting from that initial loan. More firms, more households. This is the boom part of the cycle. Pretty natural. So when they invest in something, they're successful, and as long as they keep selling, they keep growing, and it benefits all parts of the economy. But like all business cycles, there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs. So as long as he is still selling and as long as there is still demand, he's good to go. Now, what's worth noting, remember, this all started with a loan that has to be paid back. As long as he stays in business, then he's making his monthly payments. Well, what happens when demand drops? Prices fall, or at worst, you go bankrupt. Well, got to shutter a factory, and that means less households. That means less household spending. And so what happens to sales? They go even further down. More firms close, more households are no longer working, less money is being spent. And so we have begun the process of recession or dropping down in the business cycle. He goes broke eventually, and guess what? He can't pay that loan back. So there you go. It's a pretty natural process, unless you stay in business forever. But businesses come and go all the time. We know that businesses fail often. And so on a micro level, we'll see businesses that start up and are doing well, and people are working. And then the business fails. And then the people in that community suffer a little bit in that micro economy until something else comes along. And then new households start working again, and it recovers again. Very natural. So let's imagine that this scenario played out in Lima, Ohio. Now, one thing that might strike you as odd, that money is still out there in the economy. The initial loan, the initial money that was spent is still out floating around. It's just not concentrated. It's spread out. It did not disappear. The bigger issue, which we'll talk about later, is there's no new money coming in. Without new money, we can't really continue to grow. At best, we are stagnant, we are static, we are flatline with the money that is already out there. So the money did not disappear. For example, over in Van Wert, they make the widgets for the machines that used to make the Takis. So that money often flowed out from Lima to Van Wert. And the Van Wert widget factory would pay households, and households would earn money. But if Lima is no longer making Takis, they no longer need machines, and that could also take down Van Wert with it. Now, Van Wert could be fine as long as that widget factory is also selling widgets to other companies in other industries, and it won't hurt them as bad. But we'll run an exaggerated situation where, at the very least, sales are going to be down in Van Wert, so fewer households are going to be working in Van Wert. But again, the money hasn't disappeared. It's just spreading to different parts of the economy. The widget factory spends money somewhere else. Households spend money somewhere else. The issue is we're just not pouring new money in. We're not generating growth through loans. At best, we kind of flatline. Perhaps over in Delphos, their economy is doing just fine. It's not a major crash. It may have affected a community or two communities to a smaller extent, but that money is out there. Eventually, it might concentrate in a new business, and the system will bounce back. Now, when it's also on the small scale, when it's just one factory or one industry that fails, it's usually not a big deal. But when we have an industry or a sector of the economy that makes up thousands of factories and it fails, it's a different story. That is a problem. If one factory goes down, maybe perhaps it takes a bank with it, but more often than not, that's not the case. The bank loaned the money to the investor for the Taki place, but the banks loan money out to people, households. The banks loan money out to other firms. They took a hit on this one, but they can weather the storm. It's just one part of the economy, just one industry. It's okay. Happens all the time. Businesses fail, banks take hits, but banks try to diversify their loans so that when the hits come, they survive. Now, if the bank is heavily invested in thousands of companies, and those thousands of companies make a large portion of their sheets, make up a large portion of their ownership and loans, then you got a problem. That's when you start to have massive bank failures, and that's when you really shut off the spigot or the faucet of water, which is money flowing into the economy. One bank goes down, one bank suffers, there still is enough loans being processed in this country that things will be fine. If you turn all the banks off, that's a pretty shocking moment. And that's what we're trying to avoid with panics, is the shock, is the exaggeration, is the pain of decline. We can weather small storms, not the big ones. So again, banks loan money to firms and households. Well, that's not happening now. We're no longer sending the money out when we're talking about a massive failure, a big industry failing. So banks can no longer loan to firms and households because they're no longer around. So they're no longer putting money in the economy. For all intents and purposes, we're turning the spigot off. Again, the money doesn't disappear. The money that's out there is out there. Possibly we flatline at best, but it's hard to have growth when you're no longer processing loans. Didn't disappear. That's out there spread throughout the economy. It's just no longer concentrated in one industry generating massive, rapid growth. No money coming out. Very hard to stimulate the economy. Very hard to recover if we're not making loans. We might flatline once we hit the bottom, and then eventually the money will concentrate on its own naturally, but it's a slow process. So how does the economy naturally recover? We just killed the economy right there. How does it eventually recover? Well, let's go through the process of what we saw at the Panic of 1873, and you can visualize this however you'd like. The investor was paying households and firms, building railroads, good times. Then the high supply couldn't make his money back, goes broke. Too bad, so sad, can't pay back the bank. Now, what initially had happened was he and many other investors took the money that was in the economy and they filtered it or concentrated it into one industry. And that concentration of a lot of money into one sector of the economy stimulated massive rapid growth. We see this throughout time with different products. Investors jump all over the next big thing and they spin on a specific thing that has high demand, and prices increase with that high demand. Everything looks good. That is the boom. The concentration via low interest loans typically. That's how this started. But then when the money disappeared, high supply ruined his business. He couldn't pay back the loan. That's when the crash occurred. But again, the money didn't disappear. That initial money that got concentrated, it's still out there. It's just now no longer concentrated. It is spread throughout the economy. The firms and households that worked for the railroad employee or work owner spent money at grocery stores, spent money on homes, spent money on covered wagons, and it spread all throughout. It's out there, but there's just no new money coming out there if we completely shut down the banks. And what we have to wait for is the money to spread and then eventually start to filter its way into the next big thing, the next concentration. And in this case, oil will be discovered and investors will jump all over that. There will be a concentration in the use of natural resources like oil and petroleum, and that concentration will stimulate the next big boom naturally. It takes time, and it's much harder for investors to concentrate that without banks and without low interest, but eventually wise investors get in on the process, and we restart the concentration process. The economy never dies. It's never dead. It's just not doing so well. That is a natural process. Eventually the money concentrates, and eventually the next big thing finds its way. Investors jump in, and that economy or that industry helps pull back the rest of the economy. Ups and downs are very natural. Panics occur. You just don't want the business cycle to be too exaggerated. Eventually the thing kicks back. The recession happens. This is without a Federal Reserve. This is without a central bank manipulating or managing the economy. This is a let it be, hands-off, completely free market. You're going to go through ups and downs. Eventually the money comes back. But people are impatient. They don't want to wait, especially during hard times, especially during big crashes. It's very painful. It's less than being impatient. It hurts. People are starving in some cases. People are living homeless in some cases. But you have to wait. Eventually the money will concentrate to other productive sectors of the economy. So that's why we have the Fed. The Federal Reserve comes along and says, look, we can manage this cycle better. Let us get our hands on it. And sure, there'll still be a business cycle. There will be booms and busts. But the booms won't be as wild and the busts won't be as painful. Let us manage the spikes. We can hit the green light when we're in recession. We can lower interest rates and increase loans. And then there's more spending. And then it will increase that concentration of money into productive parts of the economy, hopefully. It's the green light. Let us do that when we are hurting, when things are failing. And then we'll be able to stimulate the economy. The money should concentrate, which is going to create job growth. And then those new households working will spend money, and that'll create job growth in other sectors of the economy. But when things get a little too hot, when it looks like people are gambling and making risky investments, and there's too much concentration of money in the economy, you don't want all of the money, the economy in one sector, because if that one sector fails, it brings down everything. So if the Fed realizes that too much of our investing is concentrating on one sector of the economy that could fail and that could bring everything down, they slow things down, hit the brakes, stop the money from coming out by raising interest rates, less loans, less spending, slow it down before we get too hot. Prevent too much of a concentration, a volatile, risky situation where everything is sitting, all the eggs are in one basket. The Fed's biggest purpose really is just to alleviate these high ups and low downs, these swings. What they want is a flat economy, a consistent, flat growth. There's going to be a little up and down along the way, but not a giant up and a huge crash down. So what's the cause, the source? How do these panics occur, the panics that led to the creation of the Federal Reserve? Too easy to borrow money, too easy to make risky investments. You get gamblers. Gamblers put too much money down and they invest in things that don't work. And if they put too much money down and they invest too much money in industries that fail, then boom, that industry fails, it's gone, it takes the rest of the economy with it. We want smart money, not dumb money. So the Fed comes along and says, we can prevent dumb money. We can prevent risky gamblers from filtering too much of the country's economy into one sector and then putting us in a very dangerous, precarious spot. So supposedly the Fed will prevent this by raising interest rates, and that will lock out risky gamblers from taking the money and filtering it or concentrating it in the wrong part of the economy. What it should do, and they can do this by hitting the red light, by raising interest rates, is attract wise investors. When it's very expensive to borrow, you better know what you're doing. And when you know what you're doing and you do your homework, you invest money into productive parts of the economy that are not going to hurt or crash the economy, but will grow it slowly over time. So wise investors borrow money, they concentrate it into smart things like oil at that time. The gambler borrows a bunch of money, concentrates it into railroads, not a wise investment, kills the economy. By raising interest rates, the Fed can do their best to prevent money from getting into dangerous spots. Again, low interest rates, high loans, the economy grows, which is good, and they will hit the gas occasionally when we need it. But they do run the risk of gamblers coming along. People that now can cheaply borrow. Too easy to borrow, people jump on the next big hot thing. High interest, less loans, does shrink the economy, but we tend to see a concentration of investment into more productive, safer parts of the economy. You don't get massive growth, but you also do not get massive failures. Again, the boom bust cycle is completely natural, and it doesn't necessarily need the Federal Reserve. The problem is it is very slow and can be very painful on the way down, and the recovery can take a long time. And many argue that, we can do a central bank that controls the money supply with a high interest, low interest loans, and they can come in and speed things up a little bit. They can also reduce the ups and downs and the swings. Those are too extreme. If they can manage the economy and the money, they can make sure that it goes to the right place. They can make sure that the water goes to the right spots of the garden and the right places are growing, and not everything just completely turns to a dead wasteland. So they lower interest rates, start pumping out the money to the banks pump it out to you, you start spending, and you got a recovery. That's how they do it. Again, at the top though, if they have lowered interest rates, they do run the risk of the gamblers. They got to prevent the gamblers. Again, they don't want those highs and lows. They don't want the gamblers. How they prevent the gamblers? Higher interest rates. So again, lower interest rates, high loans, economy, speed it up. You can look at it as an analogy of hitting the gas pedal. Speed up the process of recovery. They don't like the natural process. They want the machine. hit the gas. And when things are getting too hot, money's concentrating maybe in the wrong sectors of the economy, maybe we have inflation, hit the brakes. You can also prevent unwise investors. Risky gamblers can't afford to take out high interest loans. Let's talk about some of these panics in the past. Famous boom bust cycles. Tulip mania is one of the more famous ones because it's just so silly. It's preposterous, but it's not, because we keep doing this over and over and over. I believe in the Netherlands several hundred years ago, tulips were the next big thing. Everybody loved tulips. The demand for tulips was hot, so the price went through the roof. Everybody had to have tulips, and everyone was investing in tulip farms and getting their own tulips and saving their tulips and trading their tulips and selling their tulips in the tulip store. And it was hot. Very much like any other industry that you've seen be the next big thing that you had to have. It was almost as valuable and sought after as gold. And then one day people said, this is kind of silly. And then the demand fell and no one wanted tulips. And so one day you were holding thousands of tulips, which you believed were worth millions and millions of dollars because everybody wanted them. Well, when the demand dropped, the price dropped, and all of a sudden your tulips are worth $5. And so you're broke. And you were a millionaire one day, the next day you have $5. Now imagine 1,000 of you. So we had millionaires spending and investing, and now all of a sudden you guys are broke doing nothing for the economy. That's a crash. The Western land bubble, another example. What's the next big thing here? As America's moving west into the Northwest Territory of Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, everyone sees that open land as a great resource. The next big thing, there's going to be money to be made, farms, factories, people are going to move out there, they're going to build homes. You got to buy that land, and you can sell that land, or buy that land and farm that land. Buy that land, build factories. So everyone starts taking out loans and buying up all the land out west. Well, guess what? It's not a productive industry because the land swamps. It's got mountains. It's filled with American Indians. You can't even move out there. And if you can, you're barely surviving. It's not generating any wealth. And you bought this land, like, okay, when's the money's going to start coming in? It never comes in. And then you got to start paying back your loans. You can't. The banks fail. Boom. It was another bubble. People thought, land out west, next big deal. The dot-com bubble, late 90s. Computers are the next big thing. We saw a proliferation of computer programs and websites, all promising to be the next big productive part of the economy. And people invested millions and billions of dollars into these different companies and different software programs and different websites. And then they waited and waited, said, all right, when are we going to start making money? They never made money off the websites. They never made money off the software programs. Time to pay back the loans. Crash. Housing bubble. Too many people were given low interest loans. Too many people were put in houses they couldn't afford. Eventually, they stopped paying their housing bill, their mortgage, and they lost their house. So you bought a $300,000 house. You can no longer pay for it. So did your neighbor and all your other neighbors. Hey, I got a $300,000 house. I got a $500,000 house. I'm doing well. Then all of a sudden, people stop paying back their loans because they should never had in the first place. And they lose their home. Now, all of a sudden, on the market, there are tons of houses available. The supply of available housing has increased. That means the price of housing goes down. So you are doing a good job. You are paying your bills every day. You're paying your mortgage. All of your neighbors aren't. Well, guess what? Your $500,000 house, it's now worth $100,000. Why? Because the supply of houses on the market has increased, and so all the value of the homes on the market has decreased. You went from having $500,000 worth of wealth to $100,000 worth of wealth. Boom, another crash. NFTs, almost like tulip mania all over again. You keep saying, why are these people thinking next big thing? I got to get an NFT, a non-fungible token. And people were bidding tons of money. There was high demand for these NFTs. And then everybody woke up one day and realized, I don't think these are worth anything. And there were scams involved as well. We'll talk about that later. Demand dropped for NFTs. The prices fell. Boom. The whole thing collapsed. Right now, we might be in another precarious bubble. AI is the next big thing. No one really knows how productive this is going to be, how it's going to work, how the language learning models will go, but people believe that it is the next big wave of computer technology that is powered by these NVIDIA microchips, which are really giant server warehouses. The technology, the hardware behind it is where a lot of investing is going. No one necessarily knows what software programs are going to come out or what the language models will create, but everyone does know that for those to exist, they need to be powered by these servers, these microchips. And so investors recognize that, and they are concentrating lots of money into NVIDIA and the chips. And you can see the spike. 2021, NVIDIA was mainly known as this video game, not video game company, but was mainly known in the computer video game world for creating the microchips that power games and frame rate on your monitors, sound cards, video cards. And then all of a sudden you can see 2023 to 2024 with the growth of AI, they now are identified as one of the main components of powering what will be the AI chat GPTs and language learning models. And so money is flooding in. But what if nothing ever comes of AI? What if the growth is too slow? What if it takes them too long to figure out and the loans start coming due? Are risky gamblers jumping in? Will Federal Reserve cuts incoming increase more gambling and more funneling and concentration into these chips? We shall see. Thanks for joining me.